Hi everybody, this is Unit 3 and it's the start of 3.06 Find a Place to Live 1. Shelter, food, and clothing are basic necessities of life. Like food and clothing, housing is a good that is produced and sold in an economic system. The housing market has a significant effect on how a person lives. The house in which a person lives depends on resources available in relation to housing costs. These costs, like those of other goods, follow the economic law of supply and demand. Understanding how the housing market works will help you make a more informed decision about where to live in the future. The type of housing people use is determined by many factors, but just like the goods and services people buy, housing is strongly influenced by the law of supply and demand. Supply and demand in the housing market can be affected by a number of special circumstances. For instance, some kinds of housing are more desirable than others, depending on location, time, and even climate. Other factors affect whether people buy their housing or choose to rent. In some cities, few people own the places in which they live. In other areas, a majority of people own their homes. Some people like to rent, and other people choose to buy. Who owns the house? One way to better understand housing is to examine who owns it and who occupies it. Using this type of categorization, there are two main types: owner-occupied housing and renter-occupied housing. Owner-occupied housing is when the people who own the house live in it. In renter-occupied housing, the house is owned by a landlord. One option that does not fit neatly into these two categories is a cooperative. In a cooperative, the building is owned collectively by many people who are similar to shareholders in the corporation, to shareholders in a corporation. The roof over your head. Another way to classify housing is by building type. The building in which people live might be a single-family home, sometimes referred to as detached housing, or it could be a large apartment building in which residents rent individual units. Another option is a townhouse, which is essentially a single-family home attached to other homes, often in a row. Another type of housing is the condominium, where individuals own apartments within a larger building or complex. Mobile homes, sometimes called trailers, are yet another option. These are often grouped in a community area called a mobile home park, and where some residents own and others rent. The roof over your head. Housing comes in all kinds of shapes, sizes, and prices. Find out more about housing types in the slideshow. You can go ahead and do that on your own. Own or rent. When it comes time to find a place to live, most consumers face two options. They can own or they can rent. To own means to purchase the property, much as a consumer might buy another good. For most owners, purchasing requires a bank loan called a mortgage. You will examine mortgages later in more detail. Renting means that a consumer pays a monthly price to the person who owns the property, the landlord. Renting makes sense for people who do not want to borrow money from a bank. Whether a consumer rents or buys does not necessarily determine what kind of home he or she will get. A consumer can rent an apartment in a building or own a condominium in a similar building. He or she can buy a single-family home or rent one. The same goes for a townhouse. Renting and owning each have advantages and disadvantages. The choices made by consumers, whether to own or rent in turn, influence the prices of various kinds of housing. The cheaper option. When it comes to housing, renting is often cheaper than buying. In an economic sense, a renter pays the opportunity cost the owner experiences for having the renter live there rather than using the property for some other purpose. Renters do not purchase a good that they can keep. In a sense, a renter buys a service, usually paying month by month for a place to live. Many renters agree to make the monthly payment for an established period of time by signing a lease. Renters who move out of a house or an apartment have nothing to show for all the rent they paid during the rental period. Rent is money transferred to the landlord. It is not an investment like buying a home is. The high cost of owning. When an owner buys a house, that person purchases the property itself. Because owners get something in exchange, instead of simply transferring money to a landlord, buying is generally more expensive than renting. Houses are pretty expensive, and few people can afford to pay for a home all at once. Most people who buy homes have to take out a bank loan called a mortgage. That is another reason for the difference in price between buying a home and renting one. The renter is paying a fee set by the landlord at the going market rate. The owner is paying back a loan to a bank on a set schedule. These are different situations and different market forces apply. When you buy a house, you own the property, and you have the right to sell it in the future. For many years, home ownership in the United States was viewed as a smart investment. Because home prices typically go up rather than down, homeowners had long enjoyed the ability to make money from their homes. But in 2008, after U.S. housing prices had reached record highs, the market collapsed. All over the country, millions of homeowners found themselves underwater. They owed more on their mortgage than their homes were worth. It took over 5 years for the housing market to recover from the crash, which sparked one of the worst economic disasters in the last 100 years. Advantages and disadvantages of owning. Owning a house is intended to provide an occupant with a good investment. Home ownership also gives residents the freedom to decorate according to their own tastes, but it requires more responsibility too. Homeowners must pay certain taxes, such as real estate or property tax, and purchase homeowners insurance. Renting provides housing at a lower cost than owning and with less responsibility, but renting brings reduced freedom and no possibility of financial gain. And then you can go ahead and complete to own or not to own on your own. Just realized what I said there. And that one's for renting. The supply of housing. You have learned about the different types of housing and how the advantages and disadvantages of renting and buying. But how does the housing market work? The law of supply and demand plays an important role, of course, but the housing market is unique compared to other markets. One of the most important things about the housing market is that the supply of housing is relatively inelastic. This is because housing is expensive and requires a significant amount of time to produce. It takes a while for the supply of housing to increase when demand rises. This means that the price of housing can change dramatically in response to changes in demand. The demand for housing. The income of potential homeowners is an important element that affects the housing market. As incomes rise, people are more likely to buy homes rather than rent because of the long-term advantages of owning. The size of the population in an area also affects the housing market significantly. If many people move into an area, the demand for housing will rise dramatically, causing prices to increase. Likewise, in an area that has many residents leave, housing prices will decline. The demographics of the population are equally important. Young people without children typically prefer the flexibility and low cost of renting. People with children generally view home ownership as more desirable because it provides greater stability as well as financial advantages over the long term. Mortgage rates. One of the most important factors that affect demand in the housing market has little to do with housing itself. It involves the interest rate owners pay to take out a mortgage. A mortgage is a loan used to pay for a home or other type of real estate. The mortgage interest rate is the amount of interest charged by banks when they loan money to someone to buy a house. Because most housing loans are repaid over a long period of time, typically 15 or 30 years, small changes in interest rates can make a big difference in how much a homeowner pays every month. The cost of housing is often a major part of a family's monthly expenses, and a difference of just a few $100s can make a big difference. An interest rate that is 1 or 2 percentage points higher can change the monthly payment significantly. Therefore, when interest rates are high, the demand for housing goes down. Because of the law of supply and demand, however, lower demand will reduce prices in the housing market. This reduction will eventually make houses more affordable, raising demand again and leading to an increase in the price. This is one of the reasons why prices in the housing market can fluctuate so much. The workings of the housing market. Because of the different factors that affect housing prices, the housing market is very sensitive to changes in supply and demand. Shortages and surpluses are common, and prices go up and down very quickly in this market. Knowing the factors that influence prices in the housing market will help you down the line. Find out about them here. Click the blue triangle to begin, and then you can do that on your own. Alright, and slide 18 will continue on the next video. If you have any questions or concerns about this information, please let me know, and I will try to help you out. Have a good day, everybody.